I'm Nicole Parker, 34, from Louisville, Kentucky. I built a renewable energy startup from nothing but grit, even when my own family never thought I was enough. 2 weeks ago, my parents called. Nicole, my mom snapped, her voice sharp through the phone. You're not ready to sit with us at Christmas dinner. Not with the kind of guests we're hosting. My dad didn't even try to soften it. Focus on proving yourself first, he said. I hung up, my chest tight, and decided I wasn't begging for a seat at their table. So I stayed home. While they toasted with their high society friends, I sat at my desk finishing a proposal that could change everything. That night, I turned on the TV and there it was. My company, Solar Wave, splashed across the news. My deal had just shattered industry records, a $150 million contract shaking up the sector. I sat there alone, watching my name blaze across the screen, proving them wrong. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. And guess who was waiting in my office lobby? My parents, smiling like they'd always believed in me. But I discovered something far bigger than their approval could ever give me. Want to know how I turned their rejection into my victory? Stick around, because this story is just getting started. If you've ever been told you're not enough, share your story in the comments. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Growing up in the Parker family was never easy. My father, David Parker, was a high-powered attorney in Louisville, the kind who dominated courtrooms and dinner conversations with the same iron grip. My mother, Linda Parker, was a celebrated journalist, her bylines in every major paper, her opinions treated like gospel at home. My older brother, Justin Parker, was their golden boy, a plastic surgeon whose name was already on billboards by 30. My younger sister, Heather Parker, was no slouch either, a fund manager closing million-dollar deals before she could legally drink. Then there was me, Nicole, the odd one out, doodling solar panel designs in my notebook while they debated stock markets and malpractice suits. Our family's dinner table was a battlefield of expectations. Every Sunday we'd gather in the dining room, crystal glasses chiming, and I'd sit there invisible. Nicole, why can't you be more like Justin? Dad would say, slicing his steak, without looking up. Mom would nod, adding, Heather's already presenting to investors. What are you doing with those science projects? My renewable energy ideas were dismissed as childish fantasies. It's not a real career, Heather once sneered, rolling her eyes while checking her phone. Justin barely bothered to comment, too busy bragging about his latest procedure. I'd bite my tongue, staring at my plate, knowing they'd never understand. Those dinners shaped me, but not the way they intended. I'd escape to my room afterward, sketching designs for cleaner energy, imagining a world that didn't run on their approval. They treated my passion like a phase, something I'd outgrow when I got serious. I was 16 when Mom handed me a law school brochure saying, "This is what success looks like." I tore it up the moment she walked away. My quiet defiance grew, fueled by their constant comparisons. They thought they were pushing me to be better, but they were teaching me I'd never belong. The only person who ever saw me was my grandfather, Harold Carter. He wasn't like the rest of them. A retired engineer who built his own business from nothing, he'd sit with me for hours listening to my ideas about solar power. "You've got something special, Nicole," he'd say, his steady voice and bright eyes full of belief. "Don't let them dim your light." When I was 17, he gave me a worn-out book on renewable energy, its pages dog-eared from his own dreams. "This world needs people like you," he told me as he pressed it into my hands. It was the first time I felt truly seen. But Harold's support couldn't shield me from everything. At 18, during one especially brutal dinner, Dad tore into me about my unrealistic goals. "You're wasting your potential," he said, his words cutting deeper than usual. Heather chimed in, "Maybe if you tried harder, you'd actually matter." I pushed my chair back, heart pounding, and walked out. Mom didn't call after me. Justin didn't even look up. That night, I sat in my room staring at Harold's book, promising myself I'd prove them wrong. Not for them, but for me. School wasn't much easier. My teachers loved my ideas, but my grades slipped because I spent every spare minute researching solar technology. My classmates called me the dreamer, half mocking, half pitying. I didn't care. I was building something bigger than their approval, something that could change the way the world was powered. But every time I went home, the weight of my family's judgment pressed harder. "You're not cut out for this," Mom once said, her tone final, like she'd already written my failure. After that, I stopped sharing my dreams with them. By the time I turned 19, I was suffocating. The Parkers wanted a lawyer, a doctor, a financier, not a kid obsessed with saving the planet. Harold was the only one who kept me grounded. "They don't get to define you," he told me one afternoon as we sat on his porch, his hands rough from years of work. He shared stories of his own battles, how he'd ignored every naysayer to build his company from the ground up. "You'll find your people," he promised. I held on to that, even as my family's voices echoed in my mind, telling me I'd never be enough. During my sophomore year of college, I made the biggest decision of my life. I was 20, studying engineering at the University of Louisville, but my heart wasn't in lecture halls or textbooks. Every spare moment went into sketching designs for high-efficiency solar panels, convinced they could change how we powered the world. My dorm room was a chaos of notebooks, calculations scribbled on napkins, and articles about renewable energy. I wasn't chasing grades. I was chasing a vision. But that vision didn't fit the Parker family blueprint. So one spring afternoon, I walked into the registrar's office and dropped out. The fallout at home was immediate. Dad called me into the living room, his face red with fury. "You're throwing your life away on some pipe dream," he shouted, slamming his coffee mug on the table. Mom stood behind him, arms crossed. "This is beyond reckless, Nicole," she said. "You think you're smarter than everyone else?" Justin, visiting from his fancy clinic, just shook his head. "Good luck with that," he muttered, like I was already a lost cause. Heather was the worst. "You're embarrassing us," she snapped, her voice dripping in disdain. They didn't just disapprove, they cut me off. No tuition, no allowance, no safety net. I was on my own. I packed a bag and moved into a cramped studio apartment, the kind with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. My savings were pitiful, barely enough to cover rent. Then my grandfather, Harold Carter, called me. He was frail, his voice weakened by illness, but his words were steady. "I believe in you, Nicole," he said. Days later, he mailed me a check for $10,000, his life savings. "Build something real," he wrote in a shaky scrawl. It was the last time I heard from him. He passed away a month later, and I carried his faith like a torch. With Harold's money, I bought a used laptop, some engineering software, and a stack of books on solar technology. I named my project Solar Wave, a nod to the energy I hoped to unleash. But Louisville wasn't exactly a startup hub. And I wasn't anybody, just a college dropout with a wild idea. To survive, I worked nights at a diner, pouring coffee for truckers and counting tips to buy groceries. My days were spent in the library, teaching myself circuit design and energy storage. I'd sketch prototypes on napkins between shifts, my hands stained with coffee and ink. The loneliness hit hard. My old classmates were posting about internships and frat parties while I ate instant noodles in a room that smelled like mildew. Some nights I lay awake wondering if Dad had been right, if I was chasing a fantasy. But then I'd open Harold's book, the one he gave me, and reread his handwritten note on the first page.
"Keep going."
It was enough to quiet the doubts, at least for a while. I started reaching out to local engineers, pitching my idea at meetups in dingy community centers. Most laughed me off. "Solar's a long shot," one guy told me, sipping his beer. "Stick to something practical." But I kept talking, kept refining, kept learning. I trained myself to tune out rejection and focus on the math and the physics. My first prototype was a disaster. Wires fried, panels cracked, but it was mine. Every failure taught me something new, and I could feel myself inching closer. Months turned into a year. I was 21, broke and exhausted, but Solar Wave was taking shape. I had a working model now, a clunky little thing that generated only a fraction of the power I wanted, but it was proof that I wasn't crazy. I built a website, posted my designs, and begged for feedback from anyone willing to look. A few engineers replied, offering tips. One even mailed me a spare battery to test. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Piece by piece, I was building something, with no one but Harold's memory cheering me on. The Parkers never called. Not once. I'd see Heather's name in the business section of the paper, or Justin's face on a billboard for his clinic. Mom's articles were everywhere, and Dad's cases made headlines. They were thriving while I scraped by. But I didn't want their life. I wanted mine. Solar Wave was my rebellion, my way of proving I didn't need their approval to matter. I just needed to keep pushing, one long night at a time. One late night, at a coffee shop, I met Matthew Hayes. I was 23, hunched over my laptop in a corner booth, surrounded by empty cups and crumpled napkins covered in circuit diagrams. Solar Wave was still just a dream, a clunky prototype that barely worked. I was pitching my idea to anyone who would listen, but most people walked away. Then Matthew, tall, lanky, glasses slightly crooked, wearing a worn-out flannel, slid into the seat across from me. "You're the solar panel girl, right?" he asked, his tone curious, not mocking. He was an energy engineer fresh off a failed startup of his own, and he saw something in my designs. "This could actually work," he said, pointing at my screen. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone. Matthew and I started working side by side, burning through late nights in a rented garage we proudly called our lab. He brought the technical expertise. I brought the relentless drive. Together, we refined the solar panel design, chasing efficiency numbers no one else had cracked. 6 months in, we finally had a pitch deck and a prototype that didn't catch fire progress. Matthew suggested we look for investors. I was skeptical. Louisville wasn't exactly Silicon Valley. But he knew someone, Denise Young, a partner at Blue Horizon Ventures. We landed a meeting, and I spent days practicing my pitch, my voice shaking as I rehearsed in front of the mirror. Denise was sharp and no-nonsense, her questions slicing straight to the numbers. After grilling us, she leaned back in her chair. "You've got guts," she said. "I'm in for $50,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to officially launch Solar Wave. With Denise's funding, we rented a small office, bought better equipment, and hired a couple of part-time coders. Matthew and I poured everything into our first major project, a solar panel system for a local warehouse. We worked 18-hour days, troubleshooting, wiring, tweaking algorithms, testing output. I barely slept, living on energy drinks and the thrill of being close to something real. Matthew kept me steady with bad jokes. "We're not curing cancer, Nicole," he'd say, grinning. "But we're damn close to powering a warehouse." Denise checked in monthly, pushing us to hit milestones. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that mattered. Then everything collapsed. The warehouse installation was our big test, and we blew it. The panels overheated, frying the circuits within a week. The client pulled out, and we lost half our funding. I sat in the office staring at the charred remains of our prototype, my stomach twisted. "We're done," I told Matthew, my voice flat. I had sunk Harold's money, my savings, and 3 years of my life into this, and it felt like ashes. Dad's words rang in my head. "You're throwing your life away." Maybe he'd been right. Matthew refused to let me spiral. "Failures are data," he said, flicking aside a burnt wire. "We know what's wrong now. We fix it." I wanted to quit, but his stubborn optimism wouldn't let me. We went back to the drawing board. Matthew dug into the technical flaws, faulty heat sinks, bad voltage regulators. I focused on the math, recalculating energy yields and material costs. Denise didn't pull her funding, but her calls grew colder, emails shorter. We couldn't afford another mistake. I reached out to online forums, begging for advice from engineers across the country. One guy in Oregon sent us a paper on next-gen photovoltaic cells. It was a long shot, but it sparked an idea. We pivoted, designing a new panel with better heat management and higher output. It meant scrapping months of work, but Matthew was all in. "This is the one," he said, sketching a new layout on the whiteboard. The pivot wasn't easy. We were broke again, sharing a cheap apartment just to save money. I took freelance coding gigs to keep us afloat, while Matthew scavenged parts from discarded electronics. We tested the new design in our garage, running simulations until our laptops overheated. Slowly, it began to work. The new panels hit 20% efficiency, better than anything on the market. We weren't out of danger, but we finally had a fighting chance. Matthew and I had become a real team, not just coworkers. He didn't care about my family's judgment or my lack of a degree. He believed in Solar Wave, and that belief held me together when I doubted myself. We were building something bigger than us, one failure at a time. 3 years later, Solar Wave finally showed signs of life. I was no longer the broke dropout scraping by. Matthew and I had transformed our garage lab into a small office with a 6-person team, coders, a part-time designer, and us. Our redesigned panels hit 22% efficiency, outperforming most competitors. We landed our first real contract, a $200,000 installation for a local brewery in Louisville. It wasn't millions, but it was proof we could deliver. Soon after, 2 more businesses signed on, a community center and a small factory. Word spread. Industry blogs began mentioning Solar Wave. One even called us a promising startup. I printed that article and taped it to my desk as a reminder that we were finally getting somewhere. Denise was pleased but relentless. "You're on the radar now," she said during a call, her voice all business. "Don't get comfortable." She pushed us to scale, to pitch bigger clients. Matthew and I spent weeks crafting proposals for regional energy firms. I felt alive, like every sleepless night was finally paying off. For the first time, I really believed my family might see me differently. Christmas was coming, and I imagined walking into their annual dinner, chin up, sharing Solar Wave's wins. Maybe Dad would finally nod with respect. Maybe Mom would ask about my work. Maybe Justin and Heather would stop looking at me like a failure. I called home in early December, hoping to confirm my spot at Christmas dinner. Mom answered, her tone clipped. "Nicole, we're hosting important guests this year. Senators, CEOs, people who've actually made it," she said. "You're not ready to sit with them." I gripped the phone, stunned. "What do you mean, not ready?" I asked. Dad took the phone. "Your little project isn't there yet," he said, his voice cold. "Come back when you've got something real to show." I tried to argue, to tell them about the brewery contract, the industry blogs, but Mom cut me off. "We'll see you when you're on their level," she said. Then the line went dead. I stood in my office staring at the phone, my chest tight. Justin hadn't even bothered to weigh in. Heather, when I texted her later, replied with a single line. "Focus on catching up." Their words burned, echoing every dinner where they'd dismissed me. I wasn't welcome at my own family's table because my startup, my life's work, wasn't real enough for their elite crowd. I could have begged. I could have shown up anyway. But I was done pleading for their approval. I turned off my phone and went back to my desk. That night, I threw myself into a new proposal for Nexus Solutions, a major energy company based in Kentucky. They'd reached out after reading about our brewery project, intrigued by our high-efficiency panels. Matthew was skeptical. They were a giant, and we were barely a blip, but I saw an opportunity to prove myself, not to my family, but to the world. I reworked our pitch, crunching numbers to show how our panels could cut their costs by 30%. Matthew handled the technical specs, staying up late with me to refine every detail. Denise gave her feedback, warning us that Nexus played hardball. "They'll chew you up if you're not perfect," she said. Days blurred into nights as Christmas crept closer. While Louisville lit up with holiday lights, I was glued to my laptop, tweaking slides and running simulations. Matthew brought takeout to the office, joking about our festive diet of cold noodles. I hardly noticed the season passing. My family's rejection fueled me, but so did the brewery's glowing review. We were close to something big. I could feel it. On December 23rd, I sent Nexus a draft proposal. Their lead, Susan Lin, replied within hours, asking for a meeting on Christmas Eve. "Impressive work," she wrote. "Let's see if you can deliver." I didn't tell my family about Nexus. They didn't deserve to know. While they prepared for their high society dinner, I prepared to pitch the biggest deal of my life. Matthew and I rehearsed until midnight, testing every slide, anticipating every question. I wasn't just fighting for Solar Wave. I was fighting for the years they called me a dreamer, a failure. Susan's email stayed pinned to my screen, a beacon pulling me forward. Christmas was 2 days away, and I was ready to bet everything on that meeting, even if it meant spending the holiday alone. On Christmas Day, I sat alone in front of the TV. The office was silent except for the hum of my laptop and the glow of the screen in our cramped Louisville workspace. While my family toasted with their VIP guests, I was buried in spreadsheets, finalizing the Nexus proposal. Matthew had gone home to his parents, but I couldn't stop. This deal was my chance to prove I was more than their unready daughter. I'd been up since dawn, triple-checking every slide and every calculation. Our panels could save Nexus 30%, but they demanded perfection, and I was determined to deliver. At 2 p.m., an email from Susan Lin, Nexus's director, hit my inbox. "Solid proposal," she wrote, "but your heat dissipation system needs work. Can you fix it by tonight?" My stomach dropped. The heat issue was our old nemesis, the one that had sunk our first big project. I called Matthew, who was halfway through his mom's pecan pie. "We've got 6 hours," I said, my voice tight. He didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." By 3 p.m., he was back, coffee in hand, diving straight into the technical specs. We tore apart the design, focusing on the cooling system. I ran simulations while he reworked the schematics, our screens glowing in the silent office. Hours blurred together. I scribbled equations on a whiteboard, my hand shaking from caffeine and nerves. Matthew found a flaw in the ventilation design and suggested a new alloy for the heat sinks. "This could push efficiency to 25%, he said, his eyes bright with the same spark I saw when we first met. I recalculated the output, plugging in his changes. The numbers looked good, better than good. At 8 p.m., we had a new design, lighter, cooler, and more efficient than anything we'd ever built. I typed up the revisions and sent the updated proposal to Susan at 9:47 p.m. "Here's the fix," I wrote, hitting send with a knot in my stomach. I collapsed onto a couch in the office, too wired to go home. The TV played some local news segment about holiday sales in the background. Then, at 10:15 p.m., my phone pinged. Susan's name lit up the screen. "Your solution checks out," her email read. "We're signing the contract, $150 million for SolarWave to supply panels for our Midwest grid. Congratulations." I stared at the words, my breath catching. $150 million. It wasn't just a deal. It was a game changer. I called Matthew, and he whooped so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "We did it, Nicole," he shouted. I laughed, tears stinging my eyes, feeling Harold's belief in me like a warm hand on my shoulder. Before I could fully process it, the TV screen shifted. "Breaking news," the anchor said, her voice sharp. Louisville startup SolarWave had secured a $150 million contract with Nexus Solutions, marking a record in the renewable energy sector. My name flashed on the screen, Nicole Parker, co-founder of SolarWave. They called us industry pioneers, our panels a leap forward in green tech. I sat frozen, watching my face on the news, my company's logo beside Nexus's. The brewery contract, the late nights, the failures, it all led to this. I'd done what my family said I couldn't. I thought of Dad's voice telling me to come back when I had something real, of Mom's dismissal, that I wasn't ready. This was real. This was me proving them wrong on a stage they couldn't ignore. I didn't call them. I didn't need to. The world knew SolarWave now, and that was enough. I texted Matthew. "We're on the map." He replied with a single emoji, a rocket. Minutes later, Denise called, her usual cool tone replaced with excitement. "You've just shaken up the industry," she said. "Get ready for what's next." I stayed in the office replaying the news clip, letting the weight of it sink in. The contract wasn't just money, it was validation. Every doubt, every rejection, every night I questioned myself faded. I wasn't the kid they laughed off at dinner. I was Nicole Parker, and SolarWave was rewriting the rules. As midnight passed, I shut off the TV, already planning what we'd build next. The world was watching, and I was just getting started. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. By 8 a.m., my inbox overflowed with messages from reporters, industry blogs, and even competitors. SolarWave's $150 million deal with Nexus was the talk of Louisville. Social media buzzed with our name, and a radio station called us Kentucky's green tech miracle. I was still running on adrenaline and cold coffee when Matthew burst in, grinning. "We're trending," he said, waving his phone. I laughed, but my mind was already on the next steps: scaling production, hiring more engineers, keeping Nexus satisfied. Then the receptionist buzzed. "Your family's here," she said. I froze. Dad, Mom, and Heather stood in the lobby dressed like they were headed to a gala. No Justin, he was probably too busy with his billboards. I walked out, stomach twisting. Dad extended his hand, all smiles. "Nicole, we saw the news." "What an achievement." Mom nodded, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. "We're so proud," she said, almost convincingly. Heather, in a tailored blazer, chimed in. "This is huge, Nicole." "Really?" I waited for the catch. It didn't take long. Heather leaned in, lowering her voice. "I know some investors who'd love to meet you. I could set up introductions for SolarWave's sake." And there it was. They weren't here for me. They wanted a piece of my success. My fists tightened as years of dismissal flashed before me. The dinners where they ignored me, the times they mocked my dreams, the Christmas they shut me out. I wasn't their little girl anymore, begging for a seat at their table. "You're proud now?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. Dad raised an eyebrow, surprised by the pushback. "When I was pouring coffee to pay rent, where were you?" I turned to Mom. "When I dropped out to build this, you called me reckless." Heather opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "And you told me I'd never matter. Now you want to play matchmaker for your investor friends?" The lobby fell silent. Matthew, standing near the door, gave me a small nod, as if he'd been waiting for this moment too. Dad tried to smooth things over. "Nicole, we just want to support you now," he said, patronizing as ever. I shook my head. "You didn't believe in me when it was hard. You don't get to claim this now that it's easy." Mom's face tightened. "We're family," she insisted, as if that erased everything. I stepped closer. "Family doesn't tell you you're not enough. Family doesn't cut you off when you're trying to build something." Heather scoffed. "You're being dramatic. We're here, aren't we?" I looked at them. Dad with his polished suit, Mom with her perfect posture, Heather with her calculated smile. They hadn't changed. They saw my name in lights and thought they could waltz in and rewrite the story. "You're here because the news told you to be," I said. "I built this without you. I don't need your connections or your approval." The words lifted a weight from my chest. For the first time, I didn't care what they thought. Dad's smile slipped. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "You'll need us someday." I almost laughed. "I needed you 10 years ago. I don't anymore." Mom reached out, her voice softer. "Let's talk this over at lunch. We can celebrate properly." I shook my head. "I've got work to do," I said, turning back toward my office. "You know the way out." Heather muttered something under her breath, but I didn't bother to catch it. I didn't care to. As they walked out, Matthew approached with 2 fresh coffees, holding one out to me with a quiet smile. "That was badass," Matthew said, handing me a cup of coffee. I smiled, but my heart was still racing. Walking away from my family felt final, like closing a door I'd left cracked open for far too long. I sat at my desk, the Nexus contract glowing on my screen. SolarWave wasn't just a company. It was mine, built for my failures, my late nights, my defiance. I didn't need their lunch invitations or their praise. I had Matthew, Denise, and a team that believed in me. That was enough. 6 months later, SolarWave had become a household name in Louisville. Our office buzzed with new hires, and our panels powered half the city's public buildings. I was 27 now, far from the girl who used to sketch solar designs on napkins. I stopped answering calls from Dad, Mom, and Heather. Their texts shifted from polite to desperate, then eventually faded. Justin never reached out, maybe pride, maybe guilt. After our last confrontation, I realized I didn't need any of their validation. I blocked their numbers and moved forward, my focus locked on building what I had started. My world grew richer without them. Matthew had become more than a business partner. He was my rock, always ready